Okay, so picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table. Maybe it's a Sunday morning, coffee's getting cold, you've got a spreadsheet open on your laptop, and you're doing that thing that, honestly, a lot of people do, but nobody really talks about. You're just staring at your investment account, watching the number, refreshing it like it's going to change in the next 30 seconds, even though you know it won't. And there's this feeling in your chest that's somewhere between hope and frustration, because you're doing everything right. You're contributing to your 401k, you're investing consistently, you maybe even have a little taxable brokerage account going, but the number just feels small. Like no matter how much you put in, it barely moves. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you've got this vague idea that things will eventually feel different. That someday, the investing thing will start to feel real. Like it'll actually start doing something. But you're not sure when that day is, or if it's even coming, or whether you're just kidding yourself. That feeling? I know it intimately. My name is Sam, and I spend probably an embarrassing amount of time thinking about money. Not just the mechanics of it, the investing strategies and the tax optimization stuff, but the psychology of it. Why building wealth feels the way it does at different stages. Why some people hit a certain number, and suddenly their entire relationship with money shifts almost overnight, while others keep grinding without ever really noticing the change. And the number that keeps coming up, the threshold that seems to matter more than almost any other milestone, is $1 million invested. Now, before you roll your eyes and go, okay, cool, rich people problems, just hear me out. Because this isn't really about being rich, it's about understanding something fundamental about how compounding works, how your psychology shifts, and how crossing that number changes the rules of the game in ways that most people don't fully see coming. Even the people it's happening to. By the end of this, I want you to understand why that threshold matters so much, what actually changes, and honestly, how you can start thinking about some of this stuff way before you get there. Because some of these shifts, you can actually engineer them earlier. And that, I think, is worth sticking around for. The math stops feeling abstract. So let's start with the most obvious thing, because sometimes the obvious stuff is what we skip over too fast. When you have, say, $50,000 invested, which is genuinely a solid accomplishment, don't get me wrong, a 10% annual return means you made $5,000, which is great, that's real money. But here's the thing, if you're earning $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year from your job, that $5,000 from your investments is almost background noise. It's a bonus, it's nice, but it doesn't change your life. And it doesn't change how you think about your day-to-day. Now here's where it gets interesting. At $500,000, a 10% return is $50,000. That's starting to feel like something. That's a salary. You'd notice that. But at $1 million, a 10% return is $100,000. And suddenly, and I mean this almost literally, like there's a psychological click that happens, the math stops being abstract. Because your investments are now generating returns that rival or exceed what most people earn from an entire year of work. Your money is working as hard as a person. Actually harder, because it doesn't sleep, it doesn't take sick days, and it doesn't have a bad week because traffic was terrible. And here's the thing that I think most people don't fully appreciate until they're standing on the other side of it. This doesn't just change your net worth. It changes how you think. It changes what problems feel urgent and what problems start to feel optional. Because when your investment account is generating 6 figures annually, even on average, even accounting for bad years, you start to see your earned income differently. Your job stops being a survival mechanism and starts being a choice. Or at least, it starts feeling that way. And that feeling, it's kind of hard to overstate how much it changes your psychology. There's a phrase in personal finance, FU money. Kind of a crass way to put it, but the idea is money that gives you the freedom to walk away from things that don't serve you anymore. And $1 million invested isn't quite FU money in the traditional sense, but it's the beginning of it. It's the first real taste of what financial optionality actually feels like in your body, not just on paper. Compounding becomes visceral, not theoretical. Here's something I want you to think about. You've probably heard about compound interest 1,000 times. It's the thing every personal finance book opens with. Einstein allegedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, though honestly, I've never been able to verify that quote, and it might be completely made up, but whatever, the point stands. The problem is, for most of your wealth-building journey, compounding feels completely theoretical. Like yes, intellectually you understand that your returns generate returns, and over 30 years it snowballs into something huge. You've seen the charts. You've run the calculators. You know this. But knowing it and feeling it are completely different things. When you're in the early stages, let's say the first $100,000, which famously takes the longest, every dollar of growth is dwarfed by the dollars you're adding through contributions. You're basically doing most of the heavy lifting yourself. Your contributions matter more than your returns at that stage. The compounding is happening, technically, but it's not the dominant force yet. Then something starts to shift in the $200,000 to $500,000 range. You start to notice that good market years add amounts that feel meaningful. A 15% return on $300,000 is $45,000. You didn't earn that. You didn't work for it. It just showed up. And that's a little disorienting, honestly, in a good way. But at $1 million, the compounding becomes undeniable. In a strong year, your portfolio might grow by $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 in a single year from returns alone. More than most people earn in a year. More than many people have saved in their entire life. And you didn't do anything. You just stayed invested. You held. You didn't panic during the dips. And that changes your behavior in a really interesting way. Because suddenly, every time you consider doing something stupid, panic selling, chasing some hot stock, moving to cash because the news is scary, you have this visceral sense of what you'd be giving up. It's not abstract anymore. You feel the weight of what staying the course is worth. And that feeling, I'd argue, is one of the best investing tools you can have. Better than any strategy, any spreadsheet, any advisor. The compounding isn't just growing your money at this point. It's growing your conviction. Your relationship with risk fundamentally shifts. This one is a little counterintuitive, so stay with me. You might think that once someone hits $1 million invested, they'd become more conservative, more protective. Like, you've worked so hard to get here, surely you'd want to guard it, right? And sure, some people do swing that way. But the more interesting and, I think, healthier thing that often happens is the opposite. When you have a large enough base, losses become less terrifying. Not because the dollar amounts are smaller, they're actually bigger, but because you have a clearer, more embodied understanding of recovery. You've watched your portfolio drop 20%, 30%, maybe 40% in a bad year and then come back. And when you've watched $300,000 disappear on paper and then return and exceed where it was, that's a different experience than watching $30,000 disappear and return. Something in your brain starts to trust the process more completely. There's also a practical element here. With $1 million, even if the market dropped 50%, which would be catastrophic by historical standards, like Great Depression territory, you'd still have $500,000. Which is still more money than most people ever accumulate. And somehow, knowing that floor exists changes how you carry the risk. It doesn't feel like a cliff anymore. It feels like a hill. Now, this doesn't mean you should suddenly go wild and put everything in speculative assets. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is that at this level, your ability to tolerate short-term volatility in service of long-term growth becomes stronger. You can afford to take the right kinds of risks. Equity-heavy allocation, staying invested through downturns, maybe venturing into real estate or small business investment, because the foundation beneath you is solid enough to absorb mistakes. And mistakes are going to happen, they always do. But when you have $1 million base, a mistake doesn't wipe you out. It's a tuition payment. A costly one, maybe, but not a catastrophe. And that mental shift, from, I can't afford to be wrong, to, I can afford to learn from being wrong. That's powerful. That's how real wealth builds. The lifestyle trap gets both easier and harder to resist. Okay, let me be real with you for a second, because I think this is something people don't talk about honestly enough. When you hit $1 million invested, you're going to feel something. And part of what you'll feel is a pull, a justification, a little voice that says, "You've earned this." Maybe it shows up as an urge to upgrade your car, or to book a nicer vacation, or to move into a bigger house, or to just loosen up a little on the budget. And look, none of those things are inherently wrong. You have worked hard. You probably have made sacrifices. Enjoying the fruits of that is not a moral failing. But here's the trap, and it's a sneaky one. $1 million invested is a milestone, but it's not the finish line. Not for most people's financial goals. And the lifestyle upgrades that feel modest and reasonable at your current income and net worth have a way of becoming permanent fixtures in your life. Humans adapt incredibly quickly to new baselines. The nice car stops feeling nice after about 3 months. The bigger house stops feeling luxurious when you're used to it. The upgraded lifestyle just becomes life. And it costs more. Every month it costs more. The people who truly transform their financial lives after hitting $1 million, the ones who build to 2, 3, 5 million and beyond, are almost universally the people who pump the brakes on lifestyle inflation at this stage. Not forever, not into some kind of misery, but they recognize that the game is still being played, and they don't take their foot off the gas just because they've hit a checkpoint. There's actually a mathematical reason for this that I think is underappreciated. At $1 million, with a conservative 7% real return, you're on track to hit about $2 million in roughly 10 years just from growth, assuming you add nothing. But if you keep contributing, even modestly, even just matching what you were contributing to get to $1 million, that timeline can compress significantly. The second million comes faster than the first, way faster, and the third faster than the second. But if you redirect those contributions into lifestyle upgrades, you've essentially traded future millions for present comfort. And again, that might be the right trade for you. I'm not here to tell you what to want. I'm just saying, make that trade consciously. Know what you're doing. Because a lot of people stumble into it without realizing. Your identity starts to quietly reorganize. This is the one that I find most fascinating, and it's the one that's hardest to quantify, which is maybe why people don't talk about it much in personal finance circles, where everyone loves a good number. When you've been building toward $1 million for years, really grinding it out, investing consistently, maybe making sacrifices, definitely making trade-offs, your identity has been built around the pursuit. You are someone who is building wealth. That's part of how you see yourself, maybe a big part. And that identity is useful. It drives behavior. It keeps you disciplined. It helps you say no to things that would undermine your progress. But then you hit the number, and there's this weird, disorienting moment that a lot of people experience, not immediately, but a few weeks or months after the milestone, where you go, okay, now what? Because the goal that organized your behavior for years is technically achieved. And the next goal, 2 million, let's say, is just a larger version of the same goal. It doesn't have the same motivating electricity. I've talked to a lot of people about this and read a lot of accounts from people who've hit this milestone, and there's a remarkably consistent theme, a kind of quiet identity crisis. Not a dramatic one usually, not a spiral, but a real re-examination of what they're actually doing this for. And here's what I think happens for the people who navigate this well. They stop defining wealth building as a goal and start defining it as a condition, a way of operating in the world. They're not racing toward a number anymore. They're living in alignment with their values, and one of those values happens to be financial security and freedom. The behavior stays the same or gets stronger, but the internal experience of it changes completely. The people who navigate this poorly, and look, it happens, are the ones who either stop entirely because the goal feels done, or who swing to the opposite extreme, chasing bigger and bigger numbers as a substitute for meaning. Neither of those is what you want. What you want is to let the $1 million milestone be a graduation, not a finish line and not a trap. The social dynamics get weird. Can we talk about this? Because nobody really wants to, but it happens. Money changes your social life in strange ways, and the $1 million invested, especially if you're not broadcasting it, creates this weird asymmetry in your relationships. You know something about your situation that the people around you don't. You have a cushion they don't know about. You have a level of security that changes your internal experience of shared situations. Like, your friend is stressed out about whether to take the stable job or the risky startup opportunity, and you're listening empathetically, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you were in that situation, the calculus would be completely different. Because you have a foundation, the risk isn't the same for you. Or you're at dinner with colleagues complaining about their 401k match, and you're nodding along, but you've got $1 million portfolio, and you're genuinely not sure how to participate in that conversation authentically. This isn't a complaint. I want to be clear about that. Having that security is an enormous privilege, and I'm not about to frame it as a burden. But the social weirdness is real, and it can create a kind of isolation if you're not careful. You start to feel like you can't fully relate to where people are in their financial journeys, and they can't fully relate to where you are either. The people who handle this best, in my experience, are the ones who stay genuinely curious and empathetic about other people's situations, rather than mentally checking out because I've solved this problem. Because wealth is not a solved problem, it's an ongoing relationship. And staying humble, staying curious, staying connected to what it felt like to be in the earlier stages, that keeps you grounded in a really important way. The number that unlocks the real game. Here's something that I think about a lot, and I want to be careful about how I say this, because I don't want it to come across as dismissive of the $1 million milestone, because it genuinely is significant. But $1 million invested is the number that shows you the real game. It's not the game over screen. It's the moment the tutorial ends and the actual game begins. Because once you've seen what $1 million in invested assets actually looks like, what it feels like, how it changes your psychology and your options, you start to understand that the real wealth building happens after this point, not before. The people with truly generational wealth, the people who have real financial freedom in the deepest sense, they're working with multiples of this number. And the path from 1 million to 5 million or 10 million is governed by the same principles, but executed with a completely different energy. You stop thinking about accumulation and start thinking about allocation. You stop thinking about how much can I save and start thinking about what is the most effective use of this capital. You start to understand that time is the scarce resource, not money. That your job is now to make smart decisions with what you have, not to just add more to the pile. And honestly, the strategies that get you from 0 to 1 million and the strategies that grow 1 million into real, lasting, generational wealth, they're different. At 0 to 1 million, discipline is the primary engine. Consistency. Frugality where necessary. Just showing up every month and investing. At 1 million and beyond, judgment becomes the primary engine. Knowing when to be aggressive and when to be patient. Knowing which opportunities are worth taking and which look good but aren't. Knowing your own psychology well enough to not let it work against you. That shift from discipline to judgment, that's the real transformation that happens at $1 million. And it's a shift most people don't anticipate, which is why it can feel so disorienting even as it's also exhilarating. What to do if you're not there yet? Okay, so maybe you're reading all of this and you're at $50,000 or $200,000 or $400,000 and you're going, great, this is all very inspiring and also I am not there yet and I would like to be. Please help. Fair. Let's talk about that. The most important thing I can tell you, and I know this is not flashy, I know this is not the hot take you came here for, is that the path to $1 million is genuinely just consistency over time. Every serious study of how people build wealth, every survey of millionaires, every analysis of the math, it all comes back to the same thing. People who hit this milestone are mostly people who invested consistently, through good years and bad, who didn't blow up their portfolio trying to time the market or pick the next big thing, and who gave time the space to do its work. That's it. That's the unsexy truth. But here's the part that I think is worth getting excited about. Understanding what's on the other side of that milestone. Understanding how your psychology will shift, how the math will start working more visibly in your favor, how your options will expand in ways that feel almost unreal right now. That understanding can be motivational fuel. Use it. Let it pull you forward. Let it help you stay in the game during the dips, during the years when the market is flat or negative and it feels like you're running on a treadmill. Because those years are the ones that matter most. The compounding doesn't stop during a bad year. In some ways, the seeds being planted during a downturn bear the most fruit. Buying cheap shares during a market crash, staying invested when everything feels uncertain, not touching your retirement accounts when life gets hard. Those decisions, made in difficult moments, are what builds the foundation. You're not just building a portfolio, you're building the habits and the identity of someone who gets to experience everything I've described in this video. And that identity? It starts now, not when you hit the number. So let me bring this back around to where we started. That feeling, sitting at your kitchen table, watching your investment account, wondering when it's going to start feeling real. I want you to know that the answer to that question is, it will. It does. There is a point at which the math becomes undeniable, where the compounding shifts from theoretical to visceral, where your relationship with risk changes, where your options expand in ways that feel almost surreal compared to where you are now. And $1 million invested isn't a magic number in some mystical sense. I don't want you to walk away from this thinking that life will suddenly be perfect on the other side of a comma. But it is a genuine threshold, a place where the rules of the game noticeably shift, where your money starts working harder than you do, on some days, where the conversations you have with yourself about your future start to feel grounded in something real and substantial. The psychological changes are real. The mathematical changes are real. The social dynamics, the identity reorganization, the shift from discipline to judgment, all real. And knowing that these changes are coming, knowing what to expect, that might be the most underrated advantage you can have on this journey. Because wealth building, when it's done well, is not really about the money. Or at least, it's not only about the money. It's about building a life with more optionality, more breathing room, more ability to say yes to the things that matter and no to the things that don't. $1 million invested is, in many ways, just the clearest possible signal that you've started to figure out how to do that. And you'll get there. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but the math is on your side if you stay the course. The compounding is working even when you can't feel it. The foundation is being built even when the progress feels invisible. Keep going, quietly, consistently. And one day, you'll be sitting at that same kitchen table, looking at that same kind of number on that screen, and it'll feel completely different. Not because the number is magic, but because you'll know, in a way you can't quite explain but absolutely feel, that everything has changed.